Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome the members of the Tax Commission to our second meeting. It is now September 5th. I'd like to now call the meeting to order and I ask Mr. Uggan to please conduct the roll call, make the roll call.
Chairman, Senator Joe S. and Agustin.
Present.
Vice Chairman, Speaker Benjamin J. Cruz.
Present.
Minority Leader, Senator Joe V. Espadon. Economist, Mr. Joseph Bradley. Guam Society of Certified Public Accountant, Mr. Joe Arnett. Guam's Banker Association, Mr. Baron Everesto. Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Bobby Shringi. Women's Chamber of Commerce, Ms. Patricia Salas. Guam Bar Association, Mr. Lawrence Baruch. Governor of Guam Design, Designee, Mrs. Marie Benito. Guam's Congressional Delegate Designee, Mr. John Jr. Calvo.
Present.
Office of Public Auditor Doris Flores Brooks. Attorney General Honorable Elizabeth Barnett Anderson, or Barrett Anderson. My mistake. Department of Revenue and Tax Director John Camacho. Department of Administration Director Christine Balletto. Bureau of Budget and Management Research Director Lester Jr. Carson. Bureau of Statistics and Plans Director Carl Dominguez. Department of Labor, Dr. Shirley Stamabini. Guam Economic and Development Authority, Director J. Rojas and Ms. Mana Silva Tyrone. Certified Public Accountant, Mr. Robert Steffi. And University of Guam, Dr. Doreen Crisostomo.
Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the Commission, you have in front of you the minutes from our last meeting of July 12th. I hope you had received it on the email, and if there's a motion to accept it and approve it.
Motion to accept and approve.
There's a motion to accept and approve, second by Mr. Bob Shringi. All in favor, say aye. Aye. So ordered, approved. Going back to old business, everybody was given a copy of the standing rules. Do we want to address that today? If not, you can continue reading it and then making any comments to it, and we'll adjust it at a later date or adopt it at a later date. Sir, Mr. Carl?
Is it the one titled First Draft Standing Rules of the Guam Tax Commission? Is that what you're referring to? Okay.
We'll address it later then.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I may motion.
Yes, we will. We will table it. Okay. So we'll table that. Now we'll move on with the staff.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I do have a question on the standing rules. In the meantime, can we, if we have an issue with it, can we just communicate with you by email or?
Yes.
In the meantime? Okay.
Mr. Vice?
The only other thing that I might want to add with this discussion on the standing rules is the frequency of the meetings. At least for right now, if we could schedule meetings every other month. I know Congress is in session, I think they said 12 days this month, and then they go on break again. And I don't know if by next month we'll have any word on how far or if anything is going to be happening with the tax. Maybe if we just do it in November as opposed to October. So right now, every other month until Congress starts doing something with the tax proposal. Otherwise, we'll just be meeting and not having anything to discuss.
Unless anybody objects, we'll do it every other month. Unless something comes up, if something does come up, then I will contact everybody and we'll all get together real quick. Meeting the 5-day notice to make sure we're within the law. Okay? Okay, moving along, we have Mr. Camacho. He will be, based on our agenda, who will report to us exactly what we were hoping he can give us the information on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know there's a lot of tax plans that are going out there, but mainly what we concentrated basically is on the corporate side, where there's more concentration on the rates of the 15% and 20%. So what we basically did, like I mentioned last time in our meeting, it basically is that we looked at all the taxes that are filed with Guam, and basically we looked at the taxable income for the corporate and also the 1120F, excuse me. And just based on taxable income, we look at what would be the impact for, based on if the one rate was imposed of 15%, and what if it's imposed at 20%, single rate. So preliminary draft reports, we basically were saying we're looking at, $55 to $57 million on a 15% rate reduction. Based on taxable income that's reported, and basically we're looking at maybe $38 to $40 million reduction on tax just based on the 20% rate. So what this is basically, and we can all discuss this today, is what would this do to the economy? And basically we hope that it would create more jobs and spur, with the extra cash that corporates don't have to pay, hopefully that it would, generate the revenue to, hire more people. Unlike the states, their one of the main things is basically to try to invite all those people that are out there on the different countries to come back and basically employ their business with the U.S. So basically that's where we're at right now.
So you're saying with 15% as proposed by the president today, we're looking at $55 to $57 million shortfall?
Like I said, what we basically just did, Mr. Chair, is we gathered all the corporate returns and all the regular corporations and the 1120F returns, and we gathered all the taxable income. And based on the reported taxable income of all these corporations, we took the taxable income and just basically applied the rate, single rate. And that's just based on 2015. So we also went back and looked at 2014 and 2013, and the trend was basically within that range. In other words, if we look at all the taxable income. So it's not that much difference when you look at the other years, maybe a $10 million difference, you know. Of course, I think there's a trend that the taxable income is increasing every year.
I think just so that everybody understands it that's watching, the possibility of a loss is ranging from 30 to 70 million? And at the low, is it about 28, did you say?
I'm only speaking in terms of the corporate.
Yes, I
yeah.
understand, that's what I mean.
What we basically, let me repeat one more time, we gathered all the tax returns that are filed and basically accumulate all the taxable income for all these corporations. And from that, we basically apply the rate. And then we compare it for that particular tax year. So if basically what we're saying is the reduction in corporate taxes, this reduction on corporate taxes is ranging from, I think, $57 million, around that range for 2015. What we did was the rate is basically applied on a 7th year right now. But if you take all those taxes that are reported for 2015 and apply a single rate of 15, it means that the reduction will be around that range, $57 million, based on what's reported. For the 20%, same thing. You take that, what's reported, and then you apply the 20% rate, a single rate, and then the reduction will be around 40 million. Roughly 38 to $40 million.
Okay, and Mr. Camacho, do you have anything else you wanted to present to us that we may, that the members here and the people of Guam can understand pretty much? What are we looking at? Is the Department of Revenue and Tax want to consider and recommend to delink or stay linked? What is the Department of, I mean, there's something we need to know from the department, because you're the folks that handle all the taxes, so you would know this more.
Mr. Chair, basically, I don't make those recommendations. I just give reports based on facts. And that's something that I won't do.
Mr. Camacho, if I understand your initial statement, you were saying that you were hoping that these corporations, with the savings that they're going to be receiving as a result of this tax reduction, you're hoping that they will reinvest all that money in their corporations, and with that reinvestment, it'll employ more people and spur the economy. I know that's one of the theories, and I'm hoping that our university representative here or our two chamber representatives could tell us what it is that they think that the business community will do, or with all that money. How much of it will they reinvest? Will they reinvest 100%, or will they reinvest a smaller number? Or how much would we get as a result of any reinvestment, if any, to make up for the shortfall? Because that's substantial, 57.
That's correct, and I think this is why I said earlier, this is probably should be a discussion among all the members here. What would that effect do? I mean, in the plan, basically, it's supposed to employ more people. That's what they're saying, and it will drive the economy back. But that I don't know. I mean, we just have to discuss what are the possibilities if all these corporations are paying lesser tax, which is what's basically what they're saying. What are they going to do actually with this extra money?
And we'll get to you before the end. You're on the agenda, Mr. Bobby. Yes, sir.
I think it was at the our July 12th meeting that Joe Arnett mentioned that the first 5 years of the D-Link, the tax code has to be revenue neutral, huh? Yeah, just as a reminder, yeah.
That's correct. It has to be revenue neutral. Now we'll move to Ms. Benito, the Governor of Guam's designee, and she maybe can let us know what models or IRS models that may be out there for possible tax reform or grants that may be available, if any. Do you have any info on that one?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. Yes, I do have information. I did speak to or communicate with IRS, and unfortunately, they do not carry that economic model. That model is not created or maintained at their office. It's at the Congressional Budget Office that is maintained. So perhaps we can look at John Calvo to look into that. Thank you. Thank you, John.
Great. Now at least we know.
All right.
It's
Okay, good.
It's
See?
at John Calvo's table now.
We have an awesome working team here, so that goes to it's on his plate now. Thank you very much. And then as far as the grant, we did look into it. There's 2 grants that are available, and unfortunately, we can't apply for it simultaneously. So one is the Economic Development Administrative Grant, and that's a continuous. So we hope to submit that grant within the next few weeks. The contract on that is 2019. It expires on 2019. However, there's a 300 maximum. There's a cap of 300,000. And then on the tech grant, that's the other grant that we will look into. And that doesn't open until October 1st, fiscal year. Then we can apply.
Okay, thank you. And hoping Mr. Calvo from the Congresswoman's office will be able to help us out, and we don't have to, we can apply for the grant, because if we all remember correctly, Mr. Steffi brought it up that we're estimating it may be about $2 million it may cost to get an economic model going. And, you know,
Well,
the
yes,
money-
that's true.
yeah, and if we can get maybe Congresswoman Bradalio's office to help us out on this one, maybe the grant can assist us on all the other impact that we're going to face.
Right, you're right. And hopefully with the technology today, it doesn't have to cost that much. So Austin, I'm working with the State Clearinghouse right now, and Austin is making himself available to make sure this goes through.
Thank you. Members, last week I met up with Dr. Mabini and Mr. Steffi with Dr. Doreen Crisostomo from the University of Guam, and maybe we'll have her speak and tell us what we hope to get out of the university on their research.
Well, in our last meeting, you kind of like mentioned Kathleen Moore. There's 2 research areas at the university. One is the Research Center for the University of Guam. I did speak with Kathleen and how they handle, like, if you're going to make a legislature or make an appropriation, they can handle the grant. They have the pool of professionals to do it, but the disadvantage, or I don't know if it's a disadvantage, is that they charge 10% fee for that. So that's the RCUOG. And the other one is the research policy, which is under the SBPA. And we had a meeting, and your name did come up requesting for a request. So we're going to talk about, you know, until we know what needs to be done, then I can go back to the research policy and see. Now, the research policy, those are the public admin. That's under the SBPA. So, you know, they kind of like do forums. I'm sure, I don't know if you guys, you know, like issues, you know, they have forums like that. But until I know more what needs to be done, I can go back and.
There's no charge for when you do those, right?
Not that I know of.
Then maybe we'll skip Kathleen Moore and we'll just go after you, your group then. Thank you. Now, for the Chamber of Commerce, we need to know, where do you stand, for both of you actually?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, going back to the speaker's comments earlier, or the question actually, you know, well, before I can even get to that, I think the real question is, based on what you're asking over here, thoughts and potential impact. You know, there really hasn't been much of a discussion. A lot of it too is because there really hasn't been anything concrete on the table. So, you know, I was talking to Joe a little bit earlier, and we had a little discussion last week. There hasn't been much of a progress on that. But I mean, ultimately, as Mr. Camacho has stated, if there is going to be some sort of a savings element that should resonate back into boosting up the economy, and ideally that would be the intent. I mean, we can't speak for every business out there. Obviously, we would like in a perfect situation for that to occur, for the savings element to go back into, hiring more people, investing into your business. I mean, hopefully that's what we hope for. Those are the intents. So at this point, I don't really have much to say in terms of what the thoughts are, because there hasn't really been much out there in terms of discussions. But I would like to, continue the dialogue within our board and see if something does come along, then we could have a discussion on it. As far as the comment, I know you're going to ask me eventually, as you asked Mr. Camacho there, is it D-Link or Link? At this point, once again, we don't really have anything because there really is nothing on the table to really look into. Maybe my counterpart here could.
Now on the women's side.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bobby and I were talking about this last week as well. We echo the same sentiments as the Guam Chamber of Commerce. It is a little premature for us to take a position, obviously. Whether or not all of our businesses, what they will do with their savings is up for debate. I think a lot of our companies are struggling. So whether or not they're going to, invest back into their businesses, take it as owner draws, who knows what they'll do with their savings. We could put it out there for the membership and kind of poll them if you'd like. If there was some kind of tax reduction, what would you do? Or if there was some kind of windfall savings, what would you do? We could put that out there. But it is a little premature for us to make any kind of stand or
all right.
position.
Thank you, but it would, I think we would, I think the commission would like to see that the chambers do conduct a poll.
Yes,
and find out where they stand currently with what the president is looking at doing, the 15% or 20%, because not only that reduction, but we also have Speaker Cruz's bill for the minimum wage. So we're looking at, there's a lot of things out there.
And I
it's gonna
appreciate John Camacho's, his analysis was very simple. We could easily say, look at your 2015, look at your 2016 tax return, your taxable income. If there was a reduction of a certain percentage, what would you do with that dollar amount? We could easily put that out there.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Yes,
Thank you.
That's what we're hoping for, so that when we do meet, we can have a meaningful conversation about it and decide in what direction we need to go. Because I know on our last meeting we talked about D-Link, and there was comments that it may not be in favor of Guam to D-Link because of the revenue loss. By the same token, as it was mentioned by some of the members, to stay linked, we need to take a look at what the impact is going to be. And what the president is proposing right now, the 15%, we need to go back now to the business community and says, okay, what do you plan on possibly doing with that? If you're looking at reinvesting, then it may be a good move to stay linked. But if we all agreed and anyone was to propose that we should seriously consider delinking, then like Mr. Steffi brought up, we need to get our economic model going. We need to know where we stand, where we could go, and what do we need to do. Because I know the OPA is going to comment about that and what we need to do. And it's more like, let's go collect all the money we got out there, and then we'll find out where we stand from there. I'd like to recognize that also, other than the OPA is here, also we're joined by the minority leader, Senator Spaldon. Does anybody have anything they want to bring up? I know Gita's watching out her QC, so we're not going to bring that one up yet. Dr. Mabini?
Well, at least for the Chamber of Commerce, and should a survey be requested among businesses to examine what implications or what reaction would be should there be an impact on their income tax? Whether would they be investing more in human resource development? I know that at least with the Department of Labor, we've had increased interest in many businesses in using, let's say, the apprenticeship program, which does actually entail some of their business investment in building their workforce. We'd love to see more of that. We know that the intent of the president is to help, encourage businesses to stimulate business, and that means not only investing in capital, but I want to know how much human capital investment would they put in. Then that would help give us an idea of how we're going to help develop our workforce, considering the upcoming build-up activities.
And I think they will be needing your help on that. And I know the University of Guam is going to be needing that input. I think everybody's going to end up be reaching out to you, Dr. Mabini, for a lot of things. Does anybody have anything they want to bring up to the commission that we need to discuss in preparation for whatever may come up soon? Ma'am, the OPA.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I do apologize for coming late. I was at the dentist and I still have gauze in my mouth. So I know this is actually my first meeting under your chairmanship because I have missed a couple of meetings, so I do apologize. I don't know exactly what the discussion has been, but I myself is not in favor of delinking, and the primary reason is because of the tax administration burden that is going to be imposed upon additionally to revenue and taxation. Revenue and taxation right now is barely processing the returns and even getting out economic information that would be very helpful for us, like for instance, looking at a 10-year area, how much did we actually collect in corporate income tax, versus individual income tax, and see the changes there. For taxpayers, while we may not like aspects of the IRS but at least it is the rule of law that everybody can do. We can go down and buy TurboTax and use that, but we cannot even electronically file that information. So if we're going to have our own tax code, we're going to need a whole body of people to maintain that. And then when there are cases coming forward, new cases coming forward, that has to also be administered. Right now, all revenue and taxation has to do is just whatever is the form, they just copy it and just put off instead of U.S., Guam. So everybody knows the rules of engagement. Setting forth this new delinkage, and while it's supposed to be revenue neutral, what aspects are you going to have? There's a lot of unknowns for a new area like this. And they're going to have to build up their capacity to support whatever changes in law that is going to happen, and then each time the law changes, the tax returns for the people to know. As a small community of less than 200,000 people, do we have the economies of scale, to have our own tax administration? I say that we don't, and while we may not like aspects of the IRS, everybody knows the rules of engagement. That is a known factor, and that is what has helped Guam develop to the standard it is compared to the rest of Micronesia and the rest of the South Pacific. Having the rule of law is very important for businesses to decide where to invest. They don't have to guess what is going to be the rule of law in an area and decide and have their own people make that evaluation. And so, yes, there are certain aspects of the IRS we don't like, but there might be areas where it's still piggyback. A lot of states right now, for their state income tax, use the federal income tax as a mirror image and say, then we only will take away so many of these deductions or allow, like real property taxes like within Missouri or Hawaii. But fundamentally, having the IRS as its basis gives everybody knowledge and information on that. And so I am not a proponent of delinking. Thank you.
Well, we got one stand. I know we got Bobby here, and I know, but I know that was proposed. That's something that I know that the Congresswoman had brought up, that we may need to consider it. But until that falls on our table where we need to seriously consider it, because the situation may change. Where Senator Brooks is coming from, I understand that. If we have a baseline, we know where we're at. We don't need to reconfigure and guess where we need to go. We've got a solid baseline. But if the situation changes, then we'll adjust as we need to. And maybe we will adopt or create our own, but just staying where we're at is actually comfortable already. Senator Spalding, do you have anything you wanted to bring up on reference to the commission?
Not right now.
Not right now? Does anybody, Mr. Steffi, because I know that you've got the institute knowledge, you've been on the tax commission since the start of time. Mr. Steffi, would you want to comment anything? No? Does anybody have anything else they wanted to comment? Mr. Arnett, I know we had you last time. That's how we got the UOG folks now here with Patty. Nothing? Nobody wants to comment. Does anybody in the public want to comment or make any note? And I like these kind of meetings, real short. I guess until we get the impact, truly exactly where the president's going, or something more, then we can probably get a good report from the revenue and tax, a real good report, so that as we're identifying any budget years or any appropriation, we'll know where we're going, and not just hoping and wishing that it will be okay. Because I know BBMR will be looking at that and saying, wait a minute, we don't have money there. We need more money first. But if there's nothing else to be brought up, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are some people, some very notable people here at this table who were involved with the effort years ago to try to delink. And a lot of work was put into it. And I'm just wondering what the impediment may have been that we didn't proceed with the delinkage at the time, or a whole new tax code of our own. And the question then becomes, for whatever reason that is, do we face the same obstacles this time around? So if maybe, somebody who was on that commission could give us a little insight, in spite of all the work that was done, why did we not go through with it?
Joe, I know Joe's one of them institutional.
Well, also Bob could make comments as well. My remembrance of that first commission was it was organized, it was funded. We did come up with comparative studies on countries around the world, found some comparables, but we never took another step. That's where the process stopped. We had an accounting firm, a consulting firm, do the studies not only on the effect of mirroring Guam's law, but also the emphasis then was more to see if there was a way that we could adopt a simpler system that wouldn't put as much pressure on Rev and Tax. It wouldn't require them to handle the 82,000 pages of the Internal Revenue Code. And so we did. We got a study back that compared several nations around this region and saw what their inputs were in terms of taxation and what the outputs were. But as far as I can recall, that's the last step we did.
So, Mr. Arnett, bottom line, there was no recommendation that came out of that study of where we should be going?
Yeah, I don't recall that we made it. I don't recall in all the commissions that one and since whether there has been an agreement on, do we maintain the mirror, do we delink and maintain the mirror, or do we delink and write a new code? I don't think that decision has been made by any of the previous tax commissions.
Are there any records from that study back then?
There are.
And the question then becomes, I suppose, is whether they're still relevant. I mean, in terms of if we've gone through that whole process, and of course some changes have been made to the tax code, but I suppose the very basis of it and the very basic information and analysis might still be relevant. I'm just wondering, is it still relevant?
I think a great deal of the proportionate results that they gave us are still relevant. Obviously, that was many years ago, and some of these systems have changed their rates. There's been a little bit of change in some of the countries, but the proportion of revenue gained by the inputs that they defined should still be relevant. I think what our challenge will be is finding those inputs for Guam. You know, the econometric model we keep talking about is one that's used in the United States, every time tax laws are modeled, and even for this Tax Reform Act that's currently afforded, they've already done an econometric model to determine what the revenue outputs will be from the decrease in inputs. And so, picking back on that model, or creating our own, is probably going to be the basis of what decision we make. Is it cheap? No, it's not cheap. But at least it's an investment and revenue modeling that you can carry into the future. So those are decisions that we have to make about which way we go.
Mr. Chair, I guess the question then to you would be if you know the whereabouts of that information, and if you do, it might be something that this commission can take a look at and try to understand. It's a very complicated issue, changing the tax code, but that might be a good first start, at least for me, to be able to see what work and what studies were done and what it addressed, and then perhaps going forward, it would take incremental steps to do the analysis.
At the beginning of the last commission, or 2 years ago, the chairman of that commission did circulate. First of all, he requested from all of us all this information we've been carrying for years, and he summarized it and give it back to us. So I'm sure that continuing members will have not only that study that was done, but intervening documents that we can provide if necessary from the other commissions.
Yes. As a matter of fact, most of you should have received that. It was a good reading material. I know in our last meeting, everybody was like, that was a lot to read. And I know that most of you haven't read it, but you'll find that was pretty thick. That was about at least an inch, if not 2 inches thick, of reading materials from the previous commission and all the other information, because we were fortunate enough to get that from Senator Mike Nicholas' office. And as a matter of fact, Mana has it, Wilfer, but that's okay. But that's something, Mana, you wanted to bring up something? Or she's just tapping like, come on, Joe. But you know, Liz, yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, if we delink the enforcement of the tax laws, it would switch from federal court to Superior Court? Mm-hmm. So that would be a burden on Superior Court, an additional burden on Superior Court. Okay.
Yes, and that's why we brought up the economic model. We want to take a look at it, and we want to ask everybody outside of this table, what is the impact? Before we even pursue, and exactly what Mr. Arnett brought up, the model will help us no matter what. It'll tell us where we're at and where we need to go, and if not, at least how we need to be able to turn around and help DRT, revenue and tax, in changing or improving their enforcement, and then moving forward.
I'd like to make a comment, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank you for your comments, Doris, about the work and the overwhelming work at DRT. But, going back to their study back then, I believe they were going to just create a new tax law, start from scratch, and we'll all create a new tax law. I don't want to go to that route because we have to reinvent something that's already there. I agree that we should stay within the code, maybe possibly freeze it, like tax year 2016, stop there. I think our main concern was all the increases in credits that we're not being reimbursed for. The big elephant in the room, the 60 million EITC credit. But because they increase those credits every year, it's a burden, financial burden for the government of Guam. But to just, reinvent the wheel, I don't believe we should go that route, and perhaps freeze it and go with the tax code.
Sir,
Mr. Chair, I'd also like to make a comment, and maybe, I don't know if Joe or Arnett or Bob Steph, if you have any response to this. I know, are there any issues right now between Guam and the federal government IRS on differences of approach or the filing of if we do delink? Is there any differences right now, or something that I heard way back, and maybe, I don't know if you want to share that, Joe or Arnett, or?
There's a possibility for that. There are several things. If you're going to delink, there are several things you're going to need agreements from Treasury on. We've talked about Section 30. We've talked about some of the withholding taxes that go between Guam and the United States based upon where the earnings are earned and where the corporation is resident. And there's a host of individual issues as well. So the part of the process, if you decide to delink, whether you decide to delink and mirror, or whether you decide to delink and maintain this code, we're going to need to have some previous discussions with Treasury about some of these issues. There's some of these administrative issues, just like going to the Superior Court, or there's a number of conversations that need to be had with Treasury as it goes forward.
Does any other member want to comment? I know that Bob is saving it for later to comment. Mr. Carl, you look like you're ready to speak. Nothing? Anybody on this side? Yes.
I was going to ask if the former members, if there was ever any type of study done or partial study done that incorporates a delinkage yet a mirror code immediately, and then which parts of that code were like priority to look at, or possibly, you know, establish a different policy on. Has that ever been done?
Again, it's my recollection that everybody keeps going back to the first group and the study that was done there. That's where the major study was done. And she's right, the focus of that study was to delink and create a new code. I'm not remembering any situation where we did a study to delink and maintain the mirror code. Although there's some issues, there are not as many issues as delinking and creating your own code.
I'm going to leave that alone because it seems to be, we're running around in circles, and I don't want to do that. We'll wait until we can get a response from Congresswoman Berdalio through John to let us know how much help we can get. And then with the grant application, if we can get something going, so at least we would all know where we're at today. Because right now, we really don't. All we know is money's getting paid, money's being filtered to the government of Guam, the legislature is appropriating the money, and that's it. We need to get a better foundation. And then if we can get a poll from the Chamber of Commerce, if in fact the 15%, where does the business community stand on that? They plan on reinvesting? And also remember, you know, there is the minimum wage issue is going to be coming up very soon again. So no matter how, you know, it's going to impact the community. And then we'll seriously consider maybe some issues that Gita, I know, faces today. The QCs and a bunch of other stuff that's out there. And then we would expect that the Department of Labor would be helping out on the researches that UG, the business community, gosh, we got the right folks here. Okay, we got a lot of work to do. So that being said, our next meeting will not be until November 7th. Does that sound good? It's every other month. There's no sense meeting every month and we're not really moving forward. Hopefully we'll get more information. Now, please be aware that I'll be watching my email, and as it comes in, if there's more information than what we have today, then we'll go with the November 7th. If we don't, I don't want us to call a meeting just to meet. I can meet you elsewhere, at Chamorro Village or somewhere else, but we don't have to meet here, okay? And I know Bobby will call me, so there's not a problem with that one. And then I'll be working with Dr. Doreen, so we can get something moving on some kind of research and maybe a forum going on what the possibility may be, a link or delink, and what are the options. Right, Doc? We'll work that out. That being said, do I have a motion to adjourn? So moved. The meeting is adjourned. It is now 9:49. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your attendance.